Well, welcome again to another session of the 15th annual Transforming the Teaching and Learning Environment. I'm Bob Hales. Yes, you're stuck with me as your moderator again. Don't forget, Wall Street Journal is our sponsor this year. They've got one more session around the noon hour tomorrow. Q&A. If you have a chance to stop by, even just for a few minutes, I know I would appreciate it. Our session this afternoon is No Wasted Data. How to use data and student feedback to improve online courses. Our presenter is Brianna Keith, who's the Assistant Dean of Academic Quality Assessment and Compliance at excuse me, at St. Francis University. And she oversees the Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning and serves as the Accreditation Liaison Officer. That alone is a big job. She has a background in mathematics and instructional design. So, Brianna, let me turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you so much for having me, Bob, and thank you for the introduction. Welcome, everyone. I'm so happy to talk with you this afternoon about data and using data to improve online courses. So as Bob said, I wear many hats. I'm at a small university in Western Pennsylvania. So St. Francis University is located in Loretto, Pennsylvania. And my background is in instructional design. I've taught online, and now I'm more working into assessment and accreditation. So some of the big buzzwords that we're hearing is data-driven decision-making, and higher education was asked to really commit to data-driven decision-making. And so this got me thinking about, outside of assessment and accreditation, how am I using data to improve my own personal online class? Or at our Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning and our faculty developers, many of them who are joining us in this session today, how can our instructional designers and how can other instructors use data to make decisions on a smaller scale for your own personal classes? So adjustments, sometimes small, that can impact student learning, and specifically in online classes. So let me pause there and get to know you a little bit. So in the chat, if you want to share, what is your role and where do you work? Yeah, I'm curious to see, do we have faculty in here, administrators, instructional designers? Wonderful. Yeah, seeing some fellow instructional designers, faculty, assistant director of academic outreach. Wonderful. And academic program manager. Great. Well, thank you all for joining us. Yeah, can relate to probably a lot of these areas, and even our compliance specialist in here, as yeah, our department works in compliance as well. So yeah, as you're working with, if you're a faculty member, I think this definitely would apply to you. If you're an instructional designer working with faculty, or maybe at your university, you build online courses and revise them, definitely some good takeaways. Or if you're just working in any areas in teaching and learning, definitely some good takeaways for academic programming and improvements. All right, second question, if you want to just use a quick reaction for this one. So reactions in Zoom should be at the bottom if you're on a laptop or a computer. Just click reaction and give me a thumbs up if you teach online or assist with online classes. All right, wonderful, thank you. So over half of us are working with online classes. And throughout the presentation, I think there will be areas too that will apply for face-to-face or even hybrid classes as well. All right, so the goal today, I want to walk through first patterns and key points from course evaluations, You'll hear that I'm pretty passionate about this. I have worked in faculty development and done training on how to use the student feedback to improve instruction and student learning. So I am sure you probably have heard some of that before, but definitely want to look at key points from course evaluations in other areas where you can get student feedback. Then I want to dive into LMS data. This is one that I am guilty. I was not using this data, and that's where I started to come up with this idea for the presentation of how can I make better use of the LMS data. So it's not that it's wasted data, it's just data that I wasn't using personally and wanted to know how can I use that to improve my online class. And throughout looking at both of these areas, course evaluation data and LMS data, throughout we'll discuss ways to improve or make small tweaks to materials and activities. All right, so let's dive into some course evaluation data. Another quick chat for you. So which course evaluation system do you use the most, if you use more than one, or are you the most familiar with? So I'll give examples today from IDEA. So at St. Francis University, we use IDEA course evaluations. So pardon me if I am a little biased towards that one. I do think they have some great data and feedback on teaching strategies. I'll also share examples from Smart Evals, another one that I've used teaching as an adjunct at another university. So feel free to tell me which course evaluation system are you the most familiar with? All right, thank you for sharing in chat. And I see a couple others on there too, Quality Matters, and even one called Blue. Thank you. All right, so some basics that you might be familiar with when looking at course evaluation data or helping your faculty learn how to use course evaluation data. I always emphasize, I want them to look at those numeric scores. They have a tendency, or you may even have a tendency, you want to jump to the comments first. Okay, we're all guilty, but want to look at what the comments are. But let's focus on some of the numeric scores and what we're seeing and what patterns we're seeing there. Then yes, we'll look at student comments. We do need to take into reasoning context of your class and characteristics of your students. And then don't forget to make note of what you've done well. So many times, and even in this presentation, I'm going to be talking about actions for improvement, but don't forget to make note of things that are going well in the class as you're looking at data. First thing with course evaluation data for online classes, some of our online classes struggle with response rates. If that's an issue that your university is seeing as well, specifically for online classes, we can talk about some strategies for improving response rates. So for our response rates, we aim for a 60% response rate or higher, and we're not quite hitting that mark with our online classes. So some ways that we've encouraged or tried to help instructors improve response rates, or just having the instructor directly communicate. As I'm administering a course evaluation system, I can send reminders to students, but that doesn't mean as much as a communication from an instructor, whether that's an announcement, a message, or even just something in the module for the last week of the class. It's also helpful if the instructor can explain the importance of it. We just had a conversation today where one of the faculty members' child is taking classes at our university, and they were discussing, yeah, I don't think I'm going to complete those course evaluations. She's like, whoa, what? Why not? And they're like, oh, they don't mean anything. They're not important. So sometimes these students, especially freshmen, don't understand the impact of those surveys or course evaluations. And how it can be helpful for the instructor. So you may even need to give some examples, especially in an online class. If you're not able to talk with them in person or over Zoom, you may be doing a lot of written communication and need to provide some examples of how you've used feedback in the past to make changes to the course, or how that feedback has been helpful to you. Lastly, another strategy at that end week of the class, or when it's getting time to administer evaluations, it may be helpful to make it an assignment. And so there was a study that said making an evaluation an assignment, even if it's no point value, you're just saying it's a no submission assignment, 0 points, and you're simply putting in the link, that raised response rates 7% in one study. I have an opinion that I think it could be related to a due date. If you're adding a due date for that, it may be appearing on their calendar, on their to-do list, in other areas when they're logging into a learning management system. All right, so let's look at some other numeric examples and numeric scores. So this example and screenshot comes from Smart Evals. And so sometimes if you're just doing surveys or course evaluations, the system may just have more of this raw data. So how many students agreed or disagreed with the statements that were given. So Smart Evals is one where they may have 25 questions that the students are answering, and I just get more of a spreadsheet type view when I get this back. So as I'm looking at this kind of data, I may be looking for, okay, are there trends? So for number 7, readings integrated into the course. We had no students say strongly agree. Again, a very small sample size, so keeping that in mind, but none that said very strongly agree. So that may be something I need to look into. Or is it just an outlier, like number 9? It was just one student that disagreed with that. I could look into that, or that might be something, oh, it's just an outlier. I don't want to focus on that one. I really want to focus my attention on where more of the majority of students were not in the strongly agree or very strongly agree. IDEA breaks this down a little bit further for faculty. So IDEA is one of the systems that allows faculty to have input. So there's a faculty objective selection form, and they select objectives such as gaining a basic understanding as what is important to their class. So from a list of 12 objectives, you can see they're fairly broad, developing specific skills or points of view by a professional as another example, but from these 12, they pick about 3 to 5 that are important or essential for their class. And this really helps to target which teaching methods in which areas they can focus on improving. So in an example from IDEA, I can quickly scan through and say, okay, which of the objectives that I selected as important, or this I, are the students not rating as highly? Okay, the first one here, gaining a basic understanding, we have 17% in the 3 range. So maybe that's one I want to look into. Then IDEA will break this down into specific strategies. So again, this is looking at more of that raw data, that what questions did the students have and where did they rank these? But something else to consider for you or faculty, some of these may not be relevant to your class. So if you see a score, for example, this one on formed teams or groups, that wasn't important to my class and that wasn't included element. So although I may have received a lower rank on that or a score, that's not something that I'm going to look into and for improvement. It's just not an important part of that class. And that's where IDEA really takes that into consideration. I didn't select that as important for the class, so it's not going to be a suggested action. So now let's get into the teaching strategies part of that. So we're taking that student feedback, whether it's the numeric data or in IDEA, we're getting some more specifics. And now we're going to say, okay, what can we do with those scores that we saw, the question that it related to, and how does that impact, or how does that relate to a specific teaching strategy? So in IDEA, they're actually going to give you that list. In other systems, you may have to do some of this on your own. So for IDEA, it tells us we want to retain or consider increasing use in involving students in hands-on projects. And that is specifically based on an objective I selected, the one that said, I want to help students develop specific skills needed by professionals in their field. So if you're familiar with IDEA, they really do help with giving those teaching strategies. But let me go into some of the examples from the first couple that we saw. So if I'm just looking at numeric scores, here are some ways to brainstorm other teaching strategies on your own. So we saw at the beginning the Smart Evals example. Ones that we didn't have very strongly agree on was coursework contributes to the course objectives. So thinking about some sample actions for improvement, one idea here could be that in the syllabus or the learning management system, identifying the assessments that relate to the course objectives. So you may be doing that in a syllabus. You may list your objectives and then have specific assessments that are identified, but it would be nice to make sure that is explained clearly to students as well. Second, maybe I do have some activities that aren't as related to my course objectives. So maybe I just need to go through and review, maybe that there are some that students are considering busy work, and I can remove some of those or just modify them to be more related to course objectives or to make those connections clear. Early on, when I started online teaching, I received feedback in this area made it clear how each topic fit into the course. So this was a question on both the SMART evals and the IDEA evaluation. And that was an area that I strived to improve early on in my teaching career. So I was teaching an online class in technology management and technology implementation. And at the beginning, I was using one chapter from this book, one chapter from maybe an open resource, this article. And I thought, oh, this will make it easier for students because they don't have to purchase as many materials, and I'll just kind of piece it together. The problem with that is that students weren't seeing how those topics all came together, or we were jumping from one topic and it seemed like it went somewhere completely different, and they really weren't seeing how this came together as a whole. So moving forward, what I did was try to provide a chart or diagram. So we're thinking about technology implementation and management. So maybe I actually put these into like 5 steps or like a circle. My background in math, I think, lends to me in liking diagrams, but also it's helpful, easier to show somebody rather than try to explain it. So I should have put a picture of the chart or diagram here, but each week of the course, I would bring that diagram back up and say, okay, we've already done step 1 or part 1 of this. Now we're on to this second or the third part of this process of a technology implementation. Even in weekly overviews, if you're an instructional designer, you're probably working on modules and you may be creating a weekly overview. That's another area where you could explain how previous content relates to the new topics. In videos, maybe just a little reminder. This is what we covered last week, and this is what's coming next. All right, so let me back up to the comments. All right, so this is where our faculty, and even we might be guilty of jumping to this part first, and that's okay. We do need to come back to it and look in the comments. Okay, what is working well? And are there any themes? So sometimes we get a negative comment and which, just crushes us, and we're so focused on that. And so when faculty come in to have a consultation with us about an evaluation that was just hard for them to read, I tell them, okay, let's look at themes. Is that just one comment? Is there another comment there? For example, a student might say, the assignments were very confusing, and another student said they were very clear. So, is there a discrepancy? Some students are saying the opposite of what that one negative comment was. Or is there a theme? So in this one, there are 3 comments all about the amount of work. At times it's contradictory. The first one says, however, it is beneficial. So they realize that the activities are beneficial, but they're still overwhelmed. And multiple students were overwhelmed by the amount of work. So taking into account the context of the course, so an online course that is 7 weeks, okay, maybe that's contributing. It's still 3 credits, but it's an accelerated pace. That could be contributing to that comment. Or maybe it's their first time taking an online course, and that's why I'm seeing those comments. So you can take that with a grain of salt. Maybe you need to look into it, or maybe you know where that's coming from with your students. Some sample actions, maybe I need to go back to my course map and look at how many instructional hours did I estimate for some of these activities. Do I have a good balance in the workload each week, or are there some weeks that are heavier than others? For me personally, sometimes the first time I'm teaching a class, or even after I've made a lot of changes to the activities, I might have trouble estimating the time that it takes for the average student to complete those activities. So I've added in a journal reflection the first week of my online class, and that asks there's about 4 questions. One of the last questions there asks students how much time they spent during that first week, but it also sets the stage of saying, in a 7-week online course that's accelerated, you should spend about, and then I put in that estimated hours, then I ask them how many they spent, so that it's kind of putting that expectation out there so that when they are spending 10 hours a week, they know that's an expectation for their online class. All right, I pulled together some of the most frequent teaching areas related to student learning, especially for our online classes. So the two are more anecdotal here, or based on some of our federal regulations for distance education. So communication and clear expectations of assignments and grading systems, both very important for our online classes, and something that our instructional design team helps to emphasize to faculty and looks for when we're reviewing online classes. Also, feedback and answering questions. When the students are online, that one becomes much more important for those response rates. Then, based on our personal university unit reports from IDEA, some of the teaching strategies that are correlated to the most selected objectives in IDEA include opportunities for students to apply course content outside of the classroom. And I think about that strategy or that objective that I selected that said I wanted to help students develop a perspective like a professional in their field, or skills needed by professionals in their field. And this one definitely comes into play with that, and correlates to that, because you need to help them to apply that like a professional in the field. And we have a lot of health science programs. So this is one that definitely point out for your health sciences and those that are programs that are related to professional practice. And the last one that we're seeing in our university that's a teaching strategy that's correlated to a lot of our objectives selected is encouraging students to reflect on what they have learned. I mean, this one makes sense. We know that reflection helps with learning, helps with retention. It provides that opportunity for students to make connections, think about how what they're reading connects with what was discussed, or connects with what was in a lecture or a video, or just helps them to reflect on any mistakes they've made or any ways to apply that into the field. In some of the course evaluation systems, the area for comments is very vague. It just says comments. Some instructors get comments and some don't. And some instructors say, well, I just get comments for the ones that really liked it or the ones that really hated the course. So you could consider adding additional questions to your course evaluation. If you can't do that in your course evaluation system, maybe you can do that right within your learning management system. 2 open-ended questions that I use are, what aspect of the course contributed most to your learning? And then what suggestions would you offer for improvement of this course? And that's where I've received the specific questions that you saw earlier, related to workload. At St. Francis, we also add questions to all of our online classes. So we have about 10 questions, Likert scale questions specific to online classes. Again, some of these are related to what we know help students be successful in an online class, and some are also related to federal regulations. So we have a question about interaction with the instructor. So thinking about interaction, that student to student, student to instructor, and student to content, great questions to ask if you're looking for additional feedback on your online class. And then we also ask about the instructions and grading criteria for activities. Were they thorough and clear? I mentioned that I also use a journal. So if you're wanting to get that feedback a little early on before the course ends, you could consider a mid-semester survey, maybe poll questions. We've even had some instructors share they use a 1-minute paper. That can be in a face-to-face class or an online class. Classroom observation, that's a term probably used more for face-to-face classes, but a kind of peer review using a online course review checklist or an instructional designer reviewing a course could also be some ways to receive feedback throughout the course or other ways outside of just a course evaluation. All right, let me pause there and ask in the chat, what strategies are you using to solicit more feedback? So outside of just the course evaluation system, are you using any other ways to receive feedback from students, additional questions, journals, surveys, poll questions, or maybe other ideas? Feel free to share those in the chat. Personal communication, yeah, maybe even just collecting the questions that you're receiving in email and storing those in one location so that you can come back to it the next semester. Yeah, and those surveys are another great idea. All right, Shelley, I'm reading yours about a reflection assignment with open-ended questions. Okay, I like that idea. Collect it 2 times throughout the course. And Mary, thank you for your comments too. I was reading that where you also have a survey on usability of online courses. Great, wonderful. Thank you guys for sharing. All right, and one more reaction question for you. So I often will look at my course evaluations right when I receive them. So you get that email like their reports are available, I look at them. And then they kind of get tucked away into a folder. So are you remembering to go back and review those again before revising your online class? So you can give me a reaction, a clap if you're always doing that, great. A heart usually, yeah, that's me. I'm usually, don't know that I'm always so intentional about going through them. Or you can give me a thumbs up, I will be. Or if you're an instructional designer, you can give me a thumbs up. That means, yeah, I would if I had them. You don't need to review them again. You can remember them. They've left scars. Well, let's hope that they aren't seared into your soul, or that only the positive ones are seared into your soul. All right. Well, thanks for sticking with me through the course evaluation area. I'm sure many of you are probably familiar with some of that feedback and are already using that to revise your courses. But it is one of the most important areas where we are getting student feedback and data that we can use for revising. So next, I want to look at LMS data. And so this is where I was excited, like, okay, how can I have all of this data in our learning management system, Canvas? But as the course is going, I'm looking at the data, mostly submissions or no submissions. But after that course has ended, I haven't really gone back to see what other data is in there that I could be using, or yeah, kind of that summary data. So let's dive into some areas for LMS data. So I'm curious what learning management systems you're using or using the most if your university has more than one. So at St. Francis University, we're using Canvas. So again, my apologies if my comments are biased towards Canvas. It's just the one that I'm most familiar with. I will share some examples of Schoology, which is the other system I use when I teach as an adjunct. Oh, good. We have some other Canvas users too. Okay. Anyone using something besides Canvas? Blackboard? Okay, we use Blackboard, so I'm familiar with Blackboard. I may not remember all the buttons now. It's been a few years. I see the smiley face there. I don't know, is that an eye roll? Like, we're still on Blackboard and struggling through it? Okay. All right, so for LMS data, I'm going to walk through just some areas like activity logs, page views, but then, okay, what do we do about that if it's low or if it's high? data on assessment submissions or participation, video views, since we're talking online classes. I won't touch a lot on quiz reports. I think faculty naturally use quiz reports to look at questions that students are missing. And the last one on key assessments, I had to include this after working in assessment. I mean, I have to include this at the end, although I won't go into a lot of details there. All right, so in Canvas, we have new analytics, a lot of nice data in there. And in Schoology, they also have an analytics. So if you're not familiar with analytics, I'm sure your kind of community guides or help pages for your LMS will point you in the right direction to find the data. So for Canvas, for new analytics, we have options for sorting this by the resource. So looking at pages, looking at discussions, looking at assignments, quizzes, you can see how many students actually clicked it. So here, like, yeah, well, how come only 4, this is a small class again, but how come only 4 out of 7 looked at my introductions? Like that one was bizarre. And then I can see how many page views. So are they coming back to it multiple times? So down here at the bottom, I mean, the ones that stand out to me are, yeah, where's the low usage? Okay, self-assessment on writing objectives. It was optional. Only 2 out of 7 took advantage of it. So do I want to make that required? Is it something that they're not seeing as valuable? And only 3 of them viewed it. The other areas that stand out to me are the ones that are the high views. So if we have, 66 times they've coming back to this, and I understand the need to read it. They come back to it, reread some of the directions, and then probably submit it. But still, that's a lot higher than some of the others. So is that assignment have a lot of parts? Is this a page where there's a lot of materials? Do I need to break that up into smaller segments? Okay, so breaking this down into they're not clicking a resource or viewing a page at all. So where is that located? Yeah, when I saw the introductions, did I not have that in the module? Did I not have that linked in the proper area? Why aren't they seeing it or clicking on it? Am I mentioning it? Do I have a weekly overview that I need to link it there? Do I need to link it in the assessment directions? So I have a page, and one of the items is kind of helping them do an outline. Only 2 of the students are viewing it, so they're not associating it with that specific assessment. So maybe I just need to link it right there when they're working on the assessment and reading the directions. Or maybe it's the title or the content that I need to revise. If they're spending too little time, is it relevant? Yeah, is it helping them with that assessment? Am I explaining the importance of it? Or if they're spending too much time, this is where I said, yeah, maybe we need to break it down into smaller pieces. Maybe it is above their level. So is it appropriate for their ability? Maybe they're spending too much time on it because they have to reread it, or they're having to go out and look things up to fill in some gaps in their knowledge. Or if it is too, the directions aren't clear, or maybe they're not concise. I'm putting in too much text and it's taking them too long to read it. And that really does depend on what kind of page, what kind of content it is, or what kind of activity. So here's an example from Schoology on specific assessments or activity. So in both systems, Canvas and Schoology, I can also sort by student. So maybe I'm looking at a student who maybe performed a little lower than others, and I'm looking for their activities and their assessments. So total submissions, okay, we can see they didn't submit one of their discussions. Looking at total time, I can see, okay, their time that they're spending, they viewed the discussion for 15 minutes, but why did they never submit it? So they were reading it. But on the other ones that they did submit, your time spent was very low. So are they downloading the directions? Yeah, where were they reading the directions? Why was that time so low? So some things to think about there on assignments. So if they're not submitting an assignment, yeah, look, they actually looked at that one assignment. So maybe I need to review the directions on it. maybe they felt they didn't have enough information to complete it, or maybe they just didn't manage their time well. Where is that assessment located? Did they forget it? Going back to this one on a discussion, did I have that in with all of the other assignments? Or was that discussion in a separate area and they forgot to come back to it? Okay, this student that's spending too little time, I thought, on the assessments. So was it too simple for them? Yeah, do I have the directions in another location? So maybe I need to put all the directions in one location where they actually submit the assignment. Maybe I need to add more details. It's too simple, and should be a graduate level course, so it should be more advanced. Are they spending too much time on this? So I don't know that I'll have this issue too much, maybe a couple overachievers in a class. So too much time, again, this could point to it's above their level. So maybe I'm at an expert level and they're at novice, and I need to break this down into more simplistic terms for them, start at a more basic level. Maybe I need to consider scaffolding it. It's such a large assignment, and I need to break it up into smaller parts or put that over time. Or the directions are just too text heavy, not clear, too confusing. They're having to reread it, come back multiple times. All right, next we'll look at discussions. Discussions in online class, I often hear faculty saying, in a face-to-face class, we had this nice conversation. It was more back and forth. In the online environment, they post their initial reply, and then they wait until the due date, Sunday night, they come back in, they post a reply to 2 students because that's where it's required, but there's never this back and forth. It doesn't get more than 2 layers like that. So how do we get them to come back to this discussion throughout the week and make it more of this conversation, back and forth conversation, rather than just it's a one-off post here and then it's a one-off post, days later, and there's no follow-up or cohesion between the conversations. So in this example, and even as you look at discussions, you'll be able to see which ones lead to further conversation based on numbers of posts. And you can also even look at that assessment data that said, okay, which students weren't participating in that at all, which were just looking at it and kind of reading and being more of a passive reader, and which were actually posting a lot in there. So if they're not posting enough, maybe you need to go back and look at, do you have an icebreaker at the beginning of the course to help students feel more comfortable talking with one another, to make it feel like a safe environment where they can openly share, and to build community? Do they have things in common with others in the class? Do they know one another? And that's one of the challenges of teaching online, is getting them to build those relationships. Are you explaining the requirements and expectations? Do they know that they need to post and then have 2 replies, or is that just the minimum and you're expecting more than that? And that's where a rubric can be helpful, because I am one of those instructors that's the minimum. And if you do the minimum, that might get you a B on the assignment. So I'm going to expect more than that. And I often need the rubric to explain that, and so they can see how that will look on a grading scale. Reviewing directions, again, where the discussion is located. So reviewing directions, if they're not posting enough, sometimes we see that the discussion board question is not an appropriate one for a conversation. The question only has one answer and one correct answer. And so there's not going to be any conversation if there's only one correct answer. So it needs to be a question that's more open-ended, and that could be areas to look into, like are they misinterpreting the question? Another suggestion here for you or instructors would be to participate in the discussion. So if they're not doing that back and forth, you may want to go in there and post additional questions or post comments. The other way I try to build that deeper level of conversation in a discussion is on my rubric, I tell students, not only do you have to reply to two additional students, you also have to come back to your initial post and reply to any comment or question that was listed underneath your post. And that way they are going back to that conversation and answering those questions. And otherwise, that's where it fizzles out. If they're posting too much on a discussion board, I don't know if you've had this one, or maybe you have one student that's posting a lot, maybe you can help students get back on track, try to look to see, are the comments off topic? If they're kind of way off topic, you could consider a netiquette guide, or again, going back to that rubric. Another idea here, maybe you just, it's not that they're posting too much, you just have a large online class. And so maybe you need to look into threaded conversations or subtopics to help make this digestible, because this is an area where when we're building the online class, we are adding in these discussions, but can also be pretty time consuming for the student. If you have a class of 30 online students and you're asking them to reply to everyone in the class, as they're reading those posts, it could be that they spent 5 hours just reading through all of the posts and writing a reply, and that could be too much. So yeah, think about how many students you have in the class, subtopics. Do they just need to reply to people talking about this theme, and they don't need to reply to everyone? They just need to reply to 2 students. What is going to be manageable? You could consider changing the format of the discussion as well. So we've tried debate style discussions where they are assigned, you are assigned this pro side and you're assigned the con, or you're assigned the attorney and you're assigned the HR representative. And they have to debate. You could put them in small groups, you could put them in partners. And again, just looking back at what are those questions that you're asking. If they're posting too much, are there too many questions all in one discussion board? All right. The next one, we're looking at LMS data to consider our videos. So videos are a big component of content delivery for our online classes. At St. Francis, we use a tool called Yuja for our videos, and we can track analytics and usage. When I teach for another university, they don't have a purchased tool university-wide, so I use a free tool called Edpuzzle for that class. And I can still see which students have watched the video, if there were questions, what kind of grade they're receiving on those questions, or I can even drill down to a specific student and see, okay, are there sections of the video they didn't watch at all, such as the end? Are there sections of the video where they've watched multiple times because it's confusing and they're having trouble? So if they're not watching the video or not watching all of the video, you might want to consider, isn't it appropriate length? If you're posting an hour-long video and they're not watching the last 30 minutes, okay, there's your clue and an idea for you to revise it. We could break it up into 2 parts. Or is it not catching their attention at the beginning and they're kind of just dropping off at the beginning? Is it important to them? Do they recognize the importance? Is it new material, or is it just covering what they already read about in the chapter? And then another one to consider to get them really watching to the very end are those interactive questions. So that's where tools like Yuja, Edpuzzle, and others, you can see here, these little question marks, the video can pause and those embedded questions come up. Makes it interactive, and then just put one at the end and that will get them to keep going through to the end. If they're spending too much time rewatching certain sections, thinking about, yeah, is it appropriate for their cognitive level? Is it difficult material and you maybe need to explain it in a different way or give an additional example? And again, I think that if they're spending too much time, interactive questions could also help with that, because then you can check for understanding and give them immediate feedback. Then the last 2 areas, quiz reports, something else you could look at in your learning management system for data, and key assessments. So for the assessments that you have pulled out or connect to your course outcomes or your program learning outcomes, looking at rubric criteria, rubric data for those assessments are students mastering the skills that you intended for your course or for that specific program? Those would be some other areas to look at data from the LMS. All right, so in the chat, a final question for you. As we're looked at the LMS data, which data do you currently examine or do you want to look at moving forward? Yeah, Paige, I'm actually preparing to revise my class for March, so this was perfect timing for me to prepare this presentation because I'm examining page views and going back and looking at that data from the last time I taught and seeing, okay, where can I move this page, or do I not need it? They're not using it. Sometimes there are additional resources and I thought they would need it, but they didn't. And you may be at a university, yeah, where you are typically reviewing this data. That's great. So yeah, these are some of the areas I don't think that our faculty typically look at in our LMS system. So definitely something I will be looking at and would like to share with them to look at too. All right, thank you everyone for joining. If you have any questions or comments, I'm happy to stay and answer. Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, if you have questions, feel free to unmute your microphone or type them in the chat.
Well, thank you very much.